Welcome back, grade 7, to our second video on how to find the whole when we have the part and the percent. You'll notice here I already have laid out a couple of bits of information for us that we're going to be taking a look at. First, as a bit of a recap, we are working with three different types or three different things. We are working with the percent, the part, and the whole. And to give an example that we talked about last week, that would be like saying you wrote a math test, and the math test was out of 25 marks. 25 marks is the whole, is the total amount of marks that you could get on a test. And let's say that on that test, you got 20 of them correct. What that means is that the part of the questions that you got right were 20 out of 25. To figure out what percent that would be, solve for percent. We take the part of 20, divide it by the whole of 25, and that would give us 0.80. Multiply that by 100, and we get a percent of 80%. But as we talked about in our last video, sometimes we're not solving for percent. Sometimes we have to solve for part, or we have to solve for whole. And so we need to rearrange our equation a little bit to solve for that. In this equation here, just as a reminder, when we're working with percent, we want to make sure that we're working with it as a decimal. In this example, that's actually why we divide by 100. That is one of our ways to get our percent into a decimal. And so in this example, that's what we did before we multiplied it by the whole. Another way to think about it is using this triangle here on the side. Now, we used a triangle similar to this when we talked about speed, distance, and time in our last unit. In this same example, we can think about part, percent, and whole. So if I'm solving for part, the top one, it's simply percent times whole. I have to make sure percent is a decimal, but they're right beside each other, so they end up being multiplied. If I'm solving for percent, it is part divided by whole. That would give me a decimal, which means I would have to multiply it by 100 to get that as my regular percentage number. To figure out to figure out whole, I would take part divided by percent. Percent would have to be a decimal, but otherwise, because they're on top of each other here, I would divide part and percent by each other in order to figure out my whole value. Let's take a look at another example question to try to better understand how to figure out the whole from a question using the percent and the part. So here I have a question that states, in a library, the fine for not returning a book on loan is 125% of the price of the book. If the fine for a book that was not returned was $90, find the price of the book. So in this example, you really want to make sure that you're returning those books because not only are you paying for the entire price of the book, you're paying more than the price of the book. So what that also tells us, though, is that we know our percentage. We know that our percent is 125%. And we know here, this is the amount that you're paying, that our part is $90. Now, this question might seem like a little bit strange because our part is actually going to be larger than our whole. In this example, the part is 125% of the whole. 100% of something means that we're paying just the regular price. If something was $20 and we had to pay 100% of that, we have to pay $20. If it was $47.50 and we had to pay 100% of it, we're paying $47.50. If something is more than 100%, then that means we're paying more than the original or the regular price. So if something was $50 and we had a percentage that was higher than 100, we might have to end up paying $60. And in this example, what we have to pay for that book that was not returned, including the fine, is going to be a larger price than the price of the actual book. That'll also help us understand when we get our answer if our answer makes sense. Is our price of the book actually less than the price of the book and the fine mixed together? Now that I have my percent and part, and I've drawn our triangle here on the side to help remind us, we are solving for the whole. That's the piece that's missing, the whole price of the book. So to do that, I need to take part divided by percent. My problem, though, is that my percent needs to be a decimal. So 125%, I need to start off by making that as a decimal. 125% is 125 per out of cent 100. When I divide those two, I end up with a decimal of 1.25. Now that I have that, and I already have my part as a value, all I have to take is the part, $90, divide it by the percent as a decimal, 1.25, plug that into my calculator, and I would get a value of $72. 72 is now my answer for the whole amount, and if I take a look at that question, $72 is now the price, the original price of the book. Once again, I can double check my work here. I can say, all right, well, if the part price of the book was $90, the whole price of the book was $72, if I divide those, do I actually get my percentage? And I would. If I were to divide those two values, I get 1.25, which is my percent. If I multiplied that by 100, I would get 125% for my final answer and my final value for this particular question. As you continue to work through these questions, this triangle might be helpful for you, or the formulas that we put up previously. If it helps you, draw that triangle and plug in what you know so you can solve for what's missing.